We've always been worried about our brains kind of getting a little mushy, forgetting where we put the car keys, the phone. Now we know the prefrontal cortex is slowing down at that time. But we also know that the two hemispheres are speaking to each other a lot more. We're able to connect the dots more easily. We can see patterns.
Aneace Haddad is a former tech entrepreneur turned specialist coach for executives in the latter end of their career. And we talk about moving from resilience to joyful rejuvenation, embracing how our brain changes, and how useful the question of who will I be when I'm 100, because it pulls us from where we are today.
Here's Pod O'Sullivan with Don't Let the Old Man In, a podcast from the Wisdom Vault.
Aneace, welcome to the podcast. So good to see you.
Hello, Pod. Great to see you.
Well, I know you're joining us from Singapore today, so glad to have you on the call. Before we start, what will our listeners get from our conversation? So why should they say they're listening to you and me?
Now, wonderful. I don't know why they should be listening to us. They should be out doing something fun today. But so I've loved listening to all your podcasts. I've had a lot of fun listening to them. So what I'd love people to take away from our conversation today is kind of a clearer distinctions around these stages of life. You've spoken a lot about midlife, and there are some distinctions that I have that are a little bit different than other people have. And I think they help to kind of put things into perspective so people can kind of see where they are on their journey through life.
Fantastic. Well, that's a lovely frame. I was hoping to talk to you exactly about that, about second adulthood, third adulthood, the distinction, what it means to move from one to the other. I also want to talk to you a little bit about the work you do with senior leaders, particularly around legacy and then the way you help people to think about that. But you know what? I think a good starting point is you, as in your context, because that helps set the perspectives you bring into this conversation. As I think it was 42, I think you're thereabouts in your early 40s, you were a very successful tech entrepreneur. You sold your business. You went through a marriage breakdown, divorce, and you moved country, like all in the same year. For some people, that's like tumultuous change. But I think you think about that as a doorway into something very new and different. Tell us more about that.
I was 47 that year. I had built a payment software company in the south of France. My wife at the time was a family of people who made wine. So we lived on the vineyard, a few hundred years old in the middle of the vineyards in Provence. And my business I had built in Aix-en-Provence and grew it to 30 countries with banks around the world. And at 47, it was just the year before the global financial crisis. So it was 2007. Now everybody that can do a little bit of arithmetic in their heads has figured out how old I am now. So I was 47 when we sold. Yeah, right. I was 47 when we sold the company. And we had a big team in Singapore. So I was coming to Singapore very often from France anyway. All of my R&D was based here. My Asia Pac sales and marketing was here. So I would travel quite often to Singapore and then travel around the region from here. So at 47, sold the company. The marriage had already kind of broken down. I moved to Singapore from France, got divorced. I didn't look at it as being tumultuous at the time. I looked at it as I'm just going through stuff. There's change happening. Selling the company was a huge project that had taken a long time. My founding shareholders were all thrilled to be selling because they had held on for a long time. We didn't know the global financial crisis was brewing. And within a year and a half, it was just that was falling apart. It was only later that I saw that it was a pathway. It was a transition, a crossing, if you like, a threshold. That kind of language wasn't anywhere in my thinking at the time. I was just going through stuff. Looking back, it's a classic midlife crisis. I mean, you start questioning yourself. What is it you like? I'm an old programmer. I started my career as a C language programmer in Colorado. And and then became an entrepreneur. And then from 47 to 50, there was a lot of introspection. And looking back now, I know that's what happens when we're in that phase, is we go through a lot of introspection. And I discovered, I thought I was going to be a serial entrepreneur. So I started building other companies, but my heart wasn't in it. And I discovered that what I was really excited about, what I really liked most, was seeing my people go on and become CEOs, CTOs, CFOs of other organizations. And I discovered what I say now, which I would not have been able to say at the time. I discovered I liked people more than computers. And that sent me in a spiral. There was an identity crisis. I've heard a few of your guests talk about this, going from tech CEO, traveling the world globally to speak at banking conferences around the world, even speaking to boards of banks about innovation way back then. This was 25 something years ago. And then I started transitioning to executive coaching and mentoring, which is, you're a beginner again, you're one among tens of thousands of other people, learning new skills. People want you to tell them what to do because you've done it before, and you're struggling not to tell them because otherwise that's not really coaching. And it was quite that period was far more tumultuous than the first part of the transition. It was more the other side of it. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question.
It's a great answer because it sets the context for so many different things we can talk about. I mean, the notion of ending some major part of your life before you can even start exploring anything else, in itself, that's a huge thing. So before I jump into the exploration, I do want to ask you, as a founder of a business, and I know you work with founders, and I've done a lot of work with founders, and there's something magical about an entrepreneur who's able to bring a business out of the ground, in your case, many countries, have shareholders involved, and bring it to a sale. I mean, that's so magical to be able to do that. What was the letting go like for you, as in walking away from that person? And I know you said you thought you wanted to be a serial entrepreneur, but the actual point of letting go of the baby you'd built.
So interestingly, letting go of the baby I built was less of a challenge. I had two daughters in the US that were already late teens, early 20s. My son in France was 14, 15 when I sold the company. So I'd already experienced that part. And it's part of what I've worked on since then, or written about as well, is the similarity with parenting is very strong. So, and interestingly, you use the term letting go of the baby. So I'd already seen kids grow up, and you go through the process of having to let go. If you still parent them the way they were when they were 5, 6, 7, you're going to get smacked really, really hard by them, and it just doesn't work. And then when they're 17, 18, 19, you parent them differently. And then early 20s, it's yet completely different. And you go through that phase of learning that your value is not necessarily having all the answers, being able to tell them what to do because they don't want that, putting a roof over their heads, although they do like that, and they'll come back for that until they're quite a bit older and all that. But you start discovering that your value is in a different place. I don't think I struggled with that so much. I struggled with the identity of being a tech entrepreneur, a CEO, and letting go of that, and then embracing a very different identity that was much less glamorous and much in the way I was looking at things at the time. So that was hard.
Yeah.
That was hard. Flying with new colleagues in executive coaching, where the senior ones would be flying in business class paid by the organization. I'd be flying in coach because the business is not paying me because I'm not one of the founders of the coaching school or whatever, the organization. That was really weird. They go sit in the lounge. I go off and sit with everyone else when I had been flying business class all those years.
A quick pause. Hope you're enjoying this. We are so lucky on this podcast. We have great guests who share fantastic information. But I want to make sure you're getting the best value. So I've put together a small episode of exactly what to do based upon what our guest is saying and why it works. Here's the research behind it. It's a short episode. You're going to love it. It's released 2 days after this. Have a listen and let us know what you're implementing and how it worked for you. That's such a great metaphor that you've shared there. And it's, I mean, obviously it's overtly about planes and business class, but you're also talking to new beginner.
Yeah.
And the opportunity of new beginner isn't always exciting. The opportunity might be bugger. I used to be up there on that side of the plane. Now I'm back here, but hey, I'm beginning.
Yeah.
Which is a forced humility.
Yeah. And people saying, are you really committed to this? When are you going to give it up and go back to do what you were doing before? Because that's going to come.
Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. So I do want to get to the books you've written and to second adulthood, but just again to help set the context, as you worked through that transition of identity, shift the identity of I'm a successful tech entrepreneur. I've had people work for me all over the world. I've sold that. I'm not ready to go again. Oops, I don't think I want to go again. How did you start to try and get comfortable with that? Because it's the messy middle of recognizing where you just have been, but not seeing where you're going to go to. That's the part that's so hard.
Yeah. I use a metaphor of Tarzan. You're holding a vine and you're swinging and you reach out to the next vine, but then you don't let go of the first. So you kind of fall back in the middle and you're holding these 2 vines and you're just dangling in the air. So I spent maybe 3, 4, 5 years dangling in the air like that, both arms out on the 2 vines and pretending to be doing both, but actually it just wasn't moving. So I had 2 websites. My LinkedIn, didn't know what to do with it, how to describe it. And it was quite interesting until I finally said, okay, gotta let go of that vine. Otherwise you're not going to move forward. And you got to really let go of it. And then you start moving.
I'm glad you did, because you've moved to somewhere really interesting and I think very, very helpful for a lot of people. Coming to the notion of second adulthood, let me just bring Carl Jung into the conversation, this famous Swiss psychoanalyst, student of Freud. And he had a phrase that I've always loved, which he said, the privilege of a lifetime is to finally become who you always truly were. And that sounds lovely and beautiful and true. But then he also said, and midlife is the hardest part of that journey because your psyche is moving from, being outside of us, as in, hey, I'm this person and I'm getting gratification and kudos everywhere else, to now moving internally. And he said that journey is really, really hard. And I think what you're exploring, what you've written about after you did the transition, is that new phase, that second adulthood, that exploration of what that is. And you've used a word which I really love. You said midlife crucible. You talk about, midlife is not a crisis, it's a crucible. And that's a very specific word. So tell me about that idea, what you mean by that and how you think about it.
So there are a lot of beautiful ways of describing that period. Midlife crisis, obviously, that's the most common one. Interestingly, my mother, when I was in my late 20s, my mother got me a barbecue apron for using on the barbecue, and it says, "Don't interrupt me. I'm having a midlife crisis." And I was like 28, so I think I've had a few of these things already. And
you're always a high performer, are you?
Already a high performer. And Chip Conley calls it a midlife chrysalis, which is a beautiful way of describing it. Midlife catalyst, I've heard a number of times. I think it's all of those things. I think partially it's to avoid calling it a crisis, although there is a crisis involved. It's painful. I had spoken for quite a while on Crucible because it's kind of you're in the heat of transformation and then something different comes out of it. On the other, very much like a chrysalis. It's all the same kind of thing. So for me, midlife is really that passage. It's that crossing from first to second adulthood. It's a phase. It's not decades, hopefully. It's a few years going from first adulthood into second adulthood. And then going from second to third adulthood, which is so I define them: first adulthood, 25, mid-20s to mid-40s, second adulthood, mid-40s to mid-60s, third adulthood, mid-60s to mid-80s, fourth adulthood, mid-80s to early hundreds. Now, I'm 66 for those who would have calculated earlier based on the global financial crisis and all that. So I've begun entering that third adulthood, and I'm extremely curious to watch what unfolds inside me during this period. And what I'm noticing is one of the biggest things is how people look at me. It's like, you're supposed to be retired. A few years ago, we went on a cruise. This was 8 or 9 years ago, so it's been a while now. And my wife had organized that. Her mother came from Australia. My wife's from Sydney. Her mother came from Australia. Her godmother came from Australia. I was there. We had my stepchildren, her kids there. And she told me that she got 3 senior citizen discounts. I said, wait, your mother, yes. Your godmother, yeah. Who's the third? And it was me. I was like 58 or something. I said, no, let's give it back. I don't want a senior citizen discount. I'll pay the difference. And it's this realization that the world looks at you differently. And I think there's something similar to the midlife threshold crossing crisis that goes from first to second adulthood and from second to third. I don't think it's as necessarily, we'll see, it's still early days, but I don't think it's necessarily as as painful and disruptive, but it's there because you're looked at differently, expectations are different. I'm not slowing down. I'm not retiring.
Funny your story about the third pass. I think I mentioned to you when we spoke before that I've recently gone back to university and I'm now doing a doctorate. But my student card arrived in the post the same day that my wife got her bus pass card, and we were getting the ferry into the city because Sydney, getting the ferry into the city into the Opera House is just a beautiful thing to do. And we both used our cards, and the guy at the gate's going, "You guys, are you serious?"
I would use that all the time. That's
so
a good one.
2 different stories being told at the same time. Talk to me about the 3 winds of change: physiological, neurological, and parental, and what you think about when you talk about those.
Yeah, so I call them winds of change. It's a storm blowing through your life at midlife during that crossing from first to second adulthood. Physiological is that we start noticing. It's one of the first things we notice. Our bodies are changing. It's harder to lose the weight. It comes on a lot easier. It leaves a lot harder. We don't have the energy that we used to have. We can't go out drinking one night and the next day operate properly in front of the board. It just doesn't work as well as it used to. So all of these things change. Menopause starts to set in. Andropause starts to set in. Our sleep cycles get shifted. All this stuff comes together pretty quickly at that time. And there are lots of books written. It's the area that we're really the most familiar with. But the interesting thing to me is that it forces us, every single one of us who has the privilege of living long enough goes through that process, and we develop a certain kind of humility because we become aware of how much is out of our hands and how much is due to aging and time going by. And that forces us to reckon with that and think differently about things. We also have, physiologically, we also know that we will most likely be living much longer than our parents and grandparents did. The idea of living to 100 now is just really, really commonplace in good health. And being functional. So we're starting to get the sense that, hey, I might not be like in the last part of the runway of my career. I might just be finishing the first third of my active life as opposed to the first half. I might have another whole 40, 50 years ahead of me of productive, active time. So all of that is physiological. Neurological, we've always been worried about our brains kind of getting a little mushy, forgetting where we put the car keys, the phone, our kid's name. You look at them, you're shouting at them. You say, "I know your name. I just can't remember it right now." And all this stuff is going on. Now we know the prefrontal cortex is slowing down at that time. But we also know that the two hemispheres are speaking to each other a lot more. So we can connect the dots more easily. I suspect, and I don't know the recent research on this, but I suspect that it's kind of an evolutionary reaction to the prefrontal cortex slowing down, is that the two hemispheres talk more and we continue functioning much like we have in the past. It compensates, but along with that compensating, we're able to connect the dots more easily. We can see patterns where we didn't used to see patterns so easily. We can sit with ambiguity and paradox much longer than we did before the two hemispheres started talking. So when we were younger, even just 10, 15 years younger, when we're faced with ambiguity, we want clarity. Which is it? A or B? Is it work or life? Which one is it? I want balance between the two. After a while, we start looking at it as actually, it's not just one knob. I turn it this way for work, that way for balance, for life. We've got two knobs, so we can play with them. So poetry comes in at that time because poetry is the language of paradox and ambiguity. So all these things are happening. That's a fascinating thing is our cognitive empathy starts to decrease because our prefrontal cortex is slowing down. But our emotional empathy stays the same or increases. So we get into these weird situations where we look at someone and we say, I don't have a clue what you're talking about or why you think that way, but I get you emotionally. And it's an amazing thing that I think the world really needs, and it comes in that second adulthood and later parts of second adulthood. And then the third one, Parental, was actually the first one that I stumbled on. Is that a lot of people, a lot of executives in their 40s, 50s, their kids tend to be growing up and beginning to leave home. So these executives are grappling with, what's my value as a parent as this is happening? How do I have value as a parent when they don't want to hear all the wisdom that I have to give them and all the answers that I have in me, because I can solve all their problems if they would only listen to me, and they don't want to listen to me. So then how? Then what? And it's at the exact same time that we're struggling to learn how to do that with our teams at work and stop telling them what to do and really just say, okay, you do it your way. It's fine. I still think my way is better, but let me sit on that. And I'm willing to let that go. And after a while, we start discovering, actually, your way is a lot better than anything I would have thought of doing. Those are the winds of change, and they have a huge impact on how we evolve. Without reading any books and without going through any kind of training program or leadership development courses, it's a process in itself that really forces change.
I'm fascinated by the third one because it's not generally talked about. The first two are widely discussed in different areas, but the parental one really hit me when I first read your stuff. And only literally this morning, on my way to work, I was chatting to one of my best friends, and we were talking about our respective young adult meaning mid-20s, children. And he reminded me of me telling him maybe 12 years ago how I was really intent on raising my children to be very independent. And then he's reminded me this morning, you raise very independent children, which is why they don't want your opinion. So be careful of your intention.
That's right.
And of course, when you step back from that, you realize I've given them the best gift possible.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I like it today.
Yeah. I've come up with a term I call radically empowering presence. So the vast majority of my work is with C-suite executive teams. That's almost 100% of my work. And in that process, I've dug deep inside myself and found that my biggest value is an extension of exactly what you're talking about here. My biggest value in those teams is not fixing the problems for them, obviously, not teaching them anything, not mentoring or anything like that. It's just having this 10 out of 10, 100% belief in their ability to get through whatever mess that they're in as a group. And I've checked in with myself and found if I'm lacking, the thing won't move. If I do fully believe they can, there's something in the way I carry myself, something in the facial expression and stuff, they figure it out. And that I think comes from, for me, it comes from this thought on parenting at the origin. And I think we all go through that as parents at our pace. At some point or another, and there are all kinds of stories of people that don't, and they keep telling their kids what to do, try to get them out of a bad relationship into a better relationship and divorce that man or whatever. But even those, you can see glimpses where it is emerging.
I'm glad you raised some of the neurological changes, because there's a bit of fear around, like, as example, my first insight to myself, being firmly in second adulthood, and there's no way back, was realizing I'm starting to forget people's names. And it was a complete shock to me, because I have a reputation for remembering people and remembering conversations. And I still haven't forgotten the conversations, but I forget people's names. And as you already said, I'm looking at my son and going, no, I know, I should know your name. I was there when you were born. But for the life of me right now, I just can't remember your name.
I was involved in coming up with your name.
No one was more involved than me, let me tell you. Maybe one other person, but that's it. But then also realizing, you just said this, that cognitive ability is not as sharp as it was, but that combined ability of just knowing what's truly going on, recognizing patterns, recognizing what's not being said, and being able to feel into that conversation is so much sharper. Which is where I think the wisdom starts emerging. And I don't know whether that's a neurological manifestation in terms of wisdom, or is it a lifetime of recognizing patterns and therefore going, I've seen this play out before, X and Y might happen as a result. But leaning into the kind of the joy of the emerging wisdom and not being worried about the loss of the cognitive acuity, it's a lovely kind of paradox tension there, but that's where we are.
I had read a book years ago by a neuroscientist, Elkonan Goldberg. It was called The Wisdom Paradox. And that's how he came at this. And it was more, the book dates more than 20 years. So there's a lot of more recent research that has come in and confirmed a lot of what he was already seeing back then. But it's an excellent book on these changes, and we call them wisdom. And he boils it down to these kinds of changes that are emerging, the connecting the dots and all that. What I've seen with senior executives, it can be very painful, like what you're describing with forgetting someone's name when you used to be good at it. Someone speaking to the board, and they've got a spreadsheet up on the screen, and they used to know every single cell on the spreadsheet, and now they're looking at it and they're talking, and they draw a blank. They can't remember a particular cell, what exactly was in it, and they're talking. And if you're thinking that you have to continue performing exactly the way you were in first adulthood, it can get quite brittle. But if you start embracing second adulthood and you can go, okay, John, you've got the younger brain. What is this cell again? If you got people around you that are there and you're fine with it because you know that that's how you're not that. You can't go run the marathon the way you used to, lift as much weight as you used to do. But if you can lean into that and be comfortable with it and make sure you got people around you that have that part and share the load, that there's a lot more fluidity, I think a lot more joy and moving forward.
You have a lovely metaphor in your book, The Eagle That Drank Hummingbird Nectar. that just kind of talks to this in terms of looking for the joy in the second half as opposed to being concerned about what you're losing from that first adulthood, and a shift to, enjoying work, life, family in a new way. He talked to us about that metaphor, but also talks about what the metaphor really represents.
There was a period of time when I was giving keynote talks on resilience, and the word resilience started to kind of grate at me, because it had a sense of reacting to something and then getting back to normal. It's like, let's steel ourselves and get through this thing. That's resilience. When that was actually the case younger, and there were many moments running my company, going through that transition, when that was the way it worked. You steel yourself, you harden yourself, and you get through it, and then you're at the other side of this tidal wave, and you breathe again. And then after a while, you start going, actually, that's happening all the time. Things are changing all the time. I figure out what's happening to my body in terms of the food that goes into it, and I get a good diet and all that stuff under control. And then a few years goes by, and boom, you got to start over again because it doesn't work again. And so this concept of all of this means I'm alive. All of this means I've gone through more, and I'm still here. And wow, what how grateful to be here and to have gone through that, and to still have more, hopefully, to go through. So that's where it became more this sense of rejuvenation rather than resilience. So I don't use the term resilience anymore. It's really a joyful rejuvenation. So it's not. It's a different thing.
Can I interrupt you for a second? I hope you're enjoying the conversation. I really am. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm interviewing some really cool guests. One of them talks about being a father of sons in the world of the manosphere, everything we need to know. Another one's going to talk to me about contentment in midlife. What is it? How do we get it? And I'm also talking to the author of the book on dating in midlife and all the mistakes we men make. Make sure you subscribe to get these. And if you have any questions you want me to ask, drop them into the comments, and I'll make sure to include them. Back to the show. There's something uplifting about those two words, joyful and rejuvenation. And you've reminded me of someone who, when I first met him 10 years ago, maybe, he would have been 60 then, so therefore he's in his 70s now. And I'd meet him and go, how are you, John? He goes, I have another day above ground, so of course I'm happy. Was his automatic ground. Every day above ground is a good day.
Yeah.
And it became such an automatic response for him. But what I noticed, and I'm smiling to myself as I'm remembering it, the people around him felt happier. Like, it's such a contagious type of thing. Another day above ground is a good day. So therefore, as you said, I'm grateful I have another chance to do something, because this is life. It's not that I'm waiting for life to finish so therefore I can go and do X.
Exactly.
This is it.
Exactly.
I'm in it.
I knew a CEO once who blurted out. So there was some big failure that happened in the organization. They lost money and everything. And he blurted out, nobody died, let's get pizza. And that's become something of a catchphrase for me. Nobody died, let's get pizza. Another CEO I've worked with very recently here in Singapore, every morning he checks in with himself. And in his words, he says, do I still have that skip in my step? And so he describes to his team that he took the role. He didn't need the role. He had been CEO of other companies. He had the money and all that. He took the role. It was a hard environment, complex. And every morning he checks in with himself. Do I still love what I'm doing? Do I still have a skip in my step? Yep, I do. Let's keep going. I think that's a skill that develops. That's something that develops in second adulthood much more easily.
So here's a question for you. Given all of those conversations that you're in, given that you are very mindful of entering third adulthood, and then you're aware of what's happening, for those of us who might be a bit younger, or the listeners who are listening to this who might be kind of late 40s, early 50s, who are starting to recognize some of the stuff that you're alluding to, what do we need to be mindful of? What do we need to pay attention to? What do we need to be humble about in order to learn to cultivate what you're talking about, because cultivating joyful rejuvenation is such a delight at the other end.
Yeah.
The other side of that. But
Yeah.
at this side of it, it's like, hey, that sounds a little bit kumbaya for me. I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah. My only thing to them is I never work on the basis of telling people what to do or how to work things out and move to the other side really fast and all that. It's more an awareness of the map, where they are. And we might pretend to be somewhere else. And when we pretend to be somewhere else, the map serves no purpose. If I'm trying to go from, I don't know, Singapore to Bali, but I pretend that I'm in LA, the flights that I book and all that, they're not going to get me from Singapore to Bali. It's not going to work. So 47, I'll often point out the happiness curve to people because they'll bring up things like, you can feel the hardness on that. And then you say, have you seen the happiness curve? They go, no, what? What's that? You show them the happiness curve where the bottom part of it is at 47, and it's been done with thousands and thousands of people around the world, and then it goes back up. And it's like, that's where you are. So you've got some period to go through. And sometimes it's just knowing that I'm in the middle of a storm can make it easier. So you don't curse the storm. You don't shout at the sky. You just kind of hunker down and make some hot chocolate and batten down the windows.
I find that conversation is such a great conversation to have with folks who are 38 to 45. And what I mean by that is that's typically when they are starting to see acceleration in their career or their business, whatever it is, and it coincides with second, third, maybe the fourth child arriving, coincides with, hey, we've moved house to a bigger mortgage and everything is tight, everything is hard. You got so many pulls on you at home. You want to be a great dad, you want to be a great mom, you want to be a great husband, partner, or spouse, whatever it is, and you're tired the whole time.
It's exhausting.
And you're watching the promotion track, etc. And just reminding someone in that space, and this is the life, this is the phase you're in, and it will pass, but this is the phase you're in. So that's just know where you are.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me that the vast majority of leadership literature, the vast majority of frameworks that we hear about, 5 levels of Jim Collins, the 5 ways of thinking of Robert Keegan, 5 dysfunctions of Patrick Lencioni, the vast majority of these things were written by people in their late 30s to early 40s, to a T. And they all feel like moving up. They all feel like levels. It's the gamification of adulthood, I call it. It's like you run, you win this prize, you move to the next platform, you take this ladder up. It's all moving up like that. And then somewhere in second adulthood, that thing just you start going, hey, I'm not playing that game anymore. But everything is written as if that's life. That's adulthood. Here it is. All the leadership books screaming the same stuff. It's all first adulthood language. So it's fascinating. And so obviously you think that that's life. I'm struggling, I'm pushing, and more mortgage and all this.
Yeah. And of course, what you're recognizing and what you're saying there is, for those of us who are past that, or coming past that, that used to be important. That used to be important to me. It used to be important to get on the career ladder or start my business or become a really, really great carpenter or plumber or whatever our choice of life was. It used to be important to get onto the first mortgage, to get to the second mortgage, etc. It used to be important to, how do I replace my car every 3 years so it's always in fresh condition? It may not longer be important.
Yeah.
In fact, it probably isn't in the second half of life, and certainly second adulthood. Can I go back to leadership? Because this is the space that you and I share in common in terms of the kind of work that we do outside of our podcasting type of work. You do loads of work with senior execs. You do loads of work with executives who are in that 45 to 60 age group who are now entering or firmly in this second adulthood, and maybe even thinking past a little bit about that. And you talk about the midlife leadership superpowers that they have, and to not lose sight of that, but to maybe reinvent those or redeploy them in a new way to help them figure out that transition or to be in that transition. Say more to that.
These are in my second book, Soaring Beyond Midlife. It's a manifesto for senior executives, where on the one hand, you've got the three winds of change that are causing the emergence of what I call 6 midlife leadership superpowers. Today, I'd probably call them 6 second adulthood, not second half, 6 second adulthood leadership superpowers, because midlife more and more to me is just that transition period. The first one that I like a lot, and I don't put them as levels like all the other programs and stuff and frameworks. They're just 6 superpowers that emerge at different ways and different rates. One of them I call humility and iron will. And when you look at Jim Collins, that's his 5th level of leadership. The top level of leadership for him is humility and iron will. And in his book, when he first wrote about that, again, late 30s, early 40s, he said that it's exceptionally rare and maybe you're born with it. He wasn't sure you could develop it. I think he probably has shifted that mindset, but that's stayed. That's baked into this. And the way I look at it is at second adulthood, especially latter part of second adulthood, it's kind of hard not to be at the top levels of an organization if you don't have iron will. And it's kind of hard not to be at that age if you haven't developed some humility. Otherwise, there are people like that, but it's just, I think it's rare. You kind of develop humility in the process.
Unfortunately, we're very, very aware of the leaders at the top who haven't developed the humility, which unfortunately taints everybody else who is.
Yeah, especially today with all the news that we've got. And we know I think a lot of us have one person in mind who never, ever made it. You just wish his parents had been nicer to him when he was little. But anyway, another superpower is continual rebirth, is that we start to become aware that our identity isn't as fixed as we thought it was when we were younger. There's a lot of things that have shifted. We were at one point as a father of a toddler. And then later we became a father of a teenager, completely different identity, completely different person from one to the other. And if you continue being a father of a toddler with your teenager, things get pretty weird. It just doesn't work. So you've already let go of identities all along, and you've moved along, and you start realizing it, and it's a continual rebirth. Another one is boundless ideation, is this connecting the dots, the noticing patterns, the two hemispheres talking to each other more, being able to use Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini in ways that younger people might not, because you're connecting the dots and using AI to do a lot of the grunt work and stuff that maybe your prefrontal cortex is just not bothered by anymore and doesn't want to be bothered by. And so it releases a lot. Total ownership, another of the superpowers, is that your sense of responsibility expands. It's not just the KPIs you've been given. You kind of have an extended sense of responsibility over a larger part of the organization, even the community. So on your podcast, a number of people have gone through stuff like that with soup kitchens and things like that, community work. So these are a few of the superpowers.
What I love about those is they've been around forever, right? It's not like this is new, but what you're doing though is pointing and shining a light on that this is possible for us to cultivate and in fact lean into it.
Yeah.
Because the rewards, the way of living, the way of being, the joyful rejuvenation, to use your earlier phrase, that's all on the other side of this. Yeah. And it's a natural entry point into eldership, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second in terms of third adulthood. But that notion of how I don't need to focus on my own achievement any longer. You know, I've hit my KPIs 24 quarters in a row or whatever. I've built my 1,600 house as a builder, whatever it is. That's no longer important. But the simple joy of community or other things starts coming back. And so if I go right back to my very first opening piece, where you sold your business as a tech entrepreneur. I'm not surprised that you realized after a couple of years reflection that the biggest thing that gave you joy was the people and their development in the business, because your business had expanded to so many countries. You already had achieved all of those milestones. Hence, you were naturally realizing the joy comes from elsewhere.
Yeah, there was a sense that there was something going on beneath the surface when over the years people would call me out of the blue or write me an email or something on LinkedIn out of the blue saying that their favorite time was that period. The company that I had built went through a private equity acquisition that was the sale in 2007. Then that crashed because of the global financial crisis. They were over leveraged. The banks took hold, and then the banks sold the company to another organization. It was embedded within another organization. And just over the last couple of years, it was re-spun out and bought by another company. So it's gone through turmoil since then. And then the general manager of that division or group or the old company wrote to me on LinkedIn. He had joined the company as an intern 25 something years ago or whatever it was, and worked his way up, and he's general manager. And he was writing to me that there was something in the company that's still there from when I had built it, and they still have an identity linked to that, even though the names have changed, the products have changed. And I find that really fascinating, is that there's the external purpose that we describe when we're building a company or building a product or whatever. And then there's the internal inside purpose that we don't really know, and it's kind of working its way. And that turns out to be bigger and more lasting. It's fascinating.
Oh, that's the whole DNA of organizational culture. That's just right there in terms of if you get it right, it takes a long time for it to shift because the DNA is so strong. So yeah.
I wasn't even trying to do that. I had no idea.
Great thing about culture in a small team or a large organization is culture will happen anyway.
Yeah.
So if you're attuned to what you are as a human being, you can help positively manipulate, as in shape, guide culture, because it's going to happen no matter what. So you might as well try and guide it towards a good outcome, which, whether you were conscious of it or not, was happening around you.
Yeah.
Talk to me about legacy and eldership and the subtle transition from second adulthood into what might emerge as a third adulthood. Because for me, when I think about the age and stage that you've described, the word elders come to mind for me, and eldership, and the notion of not necessarily old men sitting in the corner. I don't mean like that at all, but I mean the wisdom to shape larger conversations or to shape larger understandings or to guide people into doing really good work. That sits there for me.
Yeah.
What about you?
I would respond with, don't let the old man in. My mantra I like questions as mantras, questions that I don't answer, questions that are not easily answered, and that I just hold on to loosely. And the question right now is, what is it that we create in our 60s and 70s? And I don't ask it in terms of what am I going to do in my 60s and 70s, or even what is it that I want to create. It is more, I'm posing it as a universal question, of which I am going to have one manifestation, which is mine. But that question intrigues me. What is it that we create in our 60s and 70s? Because I believe that it's still a very generative period. And when you look at artists and musicians and surgeons and psychologists, psychiatrists, and all, some of their biggest work is later in life, 60s, 70s, even beyond. I know what we create in our 30s and 40s and 50s, and I've seen that, and I've worked with tons of people. You know that really, really well. We don't have a lot of literature and examples of what it is we create in our 60s and 70s, because it's up until recently, it's been a small number of us that have remained creative and generative in that time frame. I think we're entering a period where tens of millions of us are going to be like that. So for me, elder doesn't resonate at all in that space.
But you know what strikes me as you're talking here, Aneace, listeners to the show will know I'm a huge fan of U2, and I have been since I was 13, so quite a while ago. Those guys are now in their 60s. And in the last 6 weeks, they've released 2 new EPs of 6 songs each while they're recording a new album, right? They don't need to create anything ever again, but they're still creating, and they're still coming together to, the output of them coming together as 4 friends who've been together since they were like 15 is, in some cases, great songs. In other cases, great commentary. In other cases, nudging, awareness, but it's still creative. And I suspect for a lot of people, it'll be, really, really important music for them. But I listened to the new EP that they dropped over the Easter weekend, came out of the blue. But first thing that struck me is 4 men being very reflective at this stage of their life. But also, to your point, I kept thinking, like, these guys have got everything in their life. They don't need to do anything else, but they're still creating. And that's what's keeping them young and healthy and alive, is the fact they're still creating.
Yeah.
And they're still adding value to the conversation.
Yeah. I think that's going to be quite a universal discovery, very, very widespread discovery, that it's a shift in mindset in our 60s and 70s, and really to lean into the creativity, generativity, that kind of emerges at that time. It fits with the neurological changes that I described earlier, our increasing comfort and even appreciation for paradox and ambiguity, things that can't be reconciled easily, and looking at them and going, oh, wow, there's another one of those things that just you can't resolve it. How cool is that? As opposed to forcing resolution that we did younger. So we just don't have a lot of examples of it yet. I think we're just at the front end of that.
Yeah. Well, that's an extraordinary vision that you've opened up there that we can lean into and cultivate over the next decade or two. I really, really appreciate that. Let me move towards a vision that I know you hold for yourself. A lot of folks here will know of Viktor Frankl, famous author of a book called Man's Search for Meaning, famous prisoner who helped a lot of his fellow prisoners to paint a picture of themselves in the future. And the folks who did it really well were the folks who seemed to survive those camps in Germany in World War II. Yeah. I've heard you say that you hold a vision of yourself at age 100. Yeah. Sitting on a hill, welcoming people to a retreat. Yeah. And when I thought about that, first of all, I thought, I got a vivid picture of you doing that, by the way.
Oh, cool.
Once I got that image. Yeah, really vivid. So I'll be coming up the hill to join you on this retreat, Aneace. Oh, fantastic. I got married in Byron Bay, so I'm very happy to go back. No problem. So happy to go there. I can pick the hill for you if you want. But what struck me is the beautiful image, but also the way it pulls you forward. Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of it's there's something gravitational that pulls you that way. Talk to me from your perspective why that vision is important for you and what it does for you when you think about it.
It's actually a process that I've used with individual clients when I'm coaching senior executives one-on-one. So a third of my work is one-on-one, 2/3 is the team together, the C-suite team. But occasionally, working with an executive, when they are going through a process of maybe a bit stuck on the sense of ending their runway, that they're running out of time, this is their last shot. They got to get to the corner office, otherwise it's done, and all that kind of thing. Sometimes we'll expand that. In a conversation, it just kind of arises naturally. And I have an exercise to meditate on the question, who will I be at 100? And it's not you can't think your way into an answer because it's too far away for you to extrapolate cognitively. But if you plant it as a question, who will I be at 100? And whatever process you have that is meditative, it might be swimming, bicycle riding, walking in the forest, or actually sitting on a cushion and meditating. Whatever process you have that is meditative, planting that as a seed and allowing it to just be. And It does a few things, even before having a flash of insight. It does a few things. The first thing it does is expands your sense of it kind of it's an antidote to what we grew up with, that we go to school, we work real hard, we get to 65, we retire, and then we die, which for men that used to be a pathological thing. You die a few years later because you feel useless. And that's kind of programmed in us. We kind of think that as soon as you start questioning that, your brain can let go. You start looking at roadways longer and all that. And so the first thing it does is it relaxes the mind into this much longer view of potential life ahead. And then at some point, sometimes it might take a few days. For me, it took 2 or 3 weeks. At some point, you get a flash that feels like a dream flash. And then you know that it wasn't something you just created by cognitively structuring an image in your head. It's a dream. It flashes like a dream, and that's how that appeared to me. It's sitting on a balcony at something of a resort, above the trees, above the hill, looking out toward the ocean far away. I hadn't been to Byron Bay, but I had heard enough about Byron Bay by then. And it was morning and the sun was coming up from that. So it fit the geography and all that. And when I did go to Byron Bay, I was like, yeah, this is it. And so it becomes, that vision for me becomes a North Star. And then I look at anything I do now, does it kind of lead me in that direction, or does it take me total opposite direction to that? And that's helped me say no to some big chunks of business that were not going in that direction. They were going in the opposite direction, turned down. And so it's helped a lot in terms of defining the boundaries of what I do today so that it fits this future.
There's so much I love about that. The planting the seed that will just grow naturally, and there's nothing for you to do other than just plant it and then just sit back and wait for that dream or that flash to emerge, because it will, as you said. But it also gives you choices along the way, as in you're at a stage in your career where you're not dependent on the money, therefore you can choose what it is you want to do. But this allows you to choose, and in fact it almost forces you to choose, because if you are going to be loyal to that dream flash vision of yourself, then you choose along the way. And the third thing I love about it is, because it's not when I'm 66 or 71, it's like, actually, there's a fair bit of runway here.
Yeah.
I need to make some good choices in terms of my health and in terms of my relationships,
exactly.
in terms of how I stay content, etc.
Exactly.
That's really powerful.
Exactly.
When I hang up for you today, I'm going to go onto your website and book myself in to that retreat and make sure I get there too. That'd be really, really cool. Aneace, this has been a very fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. What questions have I not asked you that you think are worthwhile discussing?
We didn't talk about the communal nature of this type of transition, which really fascinates me. It's like there's the individual crossing from first to second adulthood and then deepening into second adulthood. We've explored that a lot. We've explored a little bit of the transitioning into third adulthood. But when you have a C-suite team together and they're all transitioned or transitioning, they've all crossed over into that space. There is something where you have a group of people that individually have been continuing to pretend like they're in first adulthood, because that's what leadership looks like. And watching them together kind of let go of that. I'm very, very fascinated by that process. I see that all the time as they grow together in these C-suite retreats together as a team. They invariably come out. There's so many times they'll come out and someone will say, I feel so much more human. And I say, I don't know why I said that, but I've heard that repeated a number of times. And I think it's just a sense of authenticity and being real. What I haven't seen, and what I think is the next kind of frontier, it's for a group like that to be together plotting successful third adulthoods. I haven't seen that yet. And there is this sense, HR doesn't touch it. So leadership development after 50 is let's groom your successor. We're not going to do anything about you. You're on your way out, dude. This is the end for you. And so then you start thinking, well, what am I going to do afterwards? You think, well, I'll play golf. Yeah, but I don't want to play golf all the time. I'll mentor people. But yeah, I don't really want to mentor people. Your palette of choices is extremely small in what people will offer. So I envision a time not too far ahead where one of these groups will kind of spontaneously start kind of giggling together on what they think they're going to be doing in third adulthood and plotting these third adulthoods. And I think that could give a lot of rejuvenative energy to a very senior executive team running a large company, because it gets giggly on what they're going to do next.
And then they suddenly have an extended runway and self-created permission to go down that route.
And what I'm doing today might lead into that. Yeah. So I'm going to give it even more energy today. Yeah. It's youthful energy I'm putting into it because I see how it's going to be leading into that future thing. We're not there. That conversation is not happening anywhere.
Well, going back to your earlier point about the potential for creativity at this phase of life and how that might hold the polarities of this is true, but this is also very, very true. And therefore, how do we create through that lens? Yeah, I love that. I love the idea that you might end up having these conversations because they will go to unexplored but potentially brilliant places for so many people. Aneace, you've been a joy to have on the show. Really glad you're here. We're going to leave some links on our website to you and to your books, etc. And anyone who's starting to notice forgetting names or starting to notice things, your book is a book to read, to understand why, and to reach into the joyful rejuvenation that will follow that. My last question for you is, what are your final words of wisdom for our listeners today?
Nobody died. Let's get pizza.
On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. It would mean a lot to us if you subscribed or pressed like on whatever platform you're watching or listening to this podcast. And if you have any comments, please leave them. We read them all and they mean a lot to us. Feel free to share this episode with anyone that you think would like it. And in the meantime, don't let the old man in.